Hey, how you guys all doing out there? It's me, Sean, back for another episode of Modern Mostly Biased Musicology from my car. That's right. Today, rather than a straight up review, it's going to be more of a discussion, although it is kind of a review. We're going to talk about Greta van Fleet. Have you guys heard these guys yet? They're starting to make some waves across at least the Canadian airwaves. On the modern rock stations or the rock stations. It's you know what, it is a tough one. So we're gonna call this one Greta van Fleet, Rock Saviours, or Thieves. Which one is it? That's the question, right? So immediately when you hear Greta van Fleet and you hear their new single or anything off of their first debut AP here, it's fucking Led Zeppelin, man. It's Zepp all the way. So the lead singer sounds like Robert Plant as much as he possibly can. The guitar player sounds like Jimmy Page. Not only sounds like Jimmy Page, he's playing Jimmy Page riffage left and right. The rhythm section, that's where they there's a little bit of a, call it a bit of a disconnect. You can definitely tell the emulation within the rhythm section. I've seen John Paul Jones live, and let me tell you, that guy's not John Paul Jones. And as far as Bonzo is concerned, you know what? There's lots of extremely talented drummers who have used Bonzo. For those who don't know, it's John Bonham from Led Zeppelin. Used him as their piece of inspiration and their muse and their main guy that they learned from, and so they've really excelled at developing a style based around his. This guy, definitely more of an emulation than a development. He's a great player though, great player. So I think that's my first comment. When I first started hearing them, I immediately, I'm a Led Zeppelin, I'm a huge Zepp fan. I'm just as big a Zepp fan as I am a Beatles fan. They're like up there, my top guys, right? In my my musical inspirations, right? As far as guitar is concerned, and one day we're gonna get into some more guitar oriented programming here on a Modern Mostly Biased Musicology. But for now, needless to say, my playing inspiration came more from Jimmy Page than many other guitarists out there. It wasn't till later on, after I had already started getting into Page and learning about Page, that I really developed an appreciation of George Harrison and other guitar players. So Page is like, man, he's my number one, right? So I listened to the EP and I'm immediately excited. Why? It's more, call it a nostalgic feel, but at the same time, there is a bit of a modern sensibility in some ways about it. It was just great to hear a proper, real rock song amongst the flood of, I don't know, call it pop, call it what you will. Some of this indie stuff is, it's not that it's bad music. It's just that there's less aggression in it, less, it's kind of, I'm reminded a little bit of the period in the 80s or even like the disco period in the 70s. We're in kind of one of those shifts right now where there's a lot of more, I don't know, call it melancholy amongst some of the new music. So, it was really exciting. I listened to the EP front to back a few times in a row, and I started, talking to my friends and saying, hey, check these guys out, Greta van Fleet. But the more I listened to it, the more I started to go, man, this sounds so much like Zeppelin. Which is a good thing. But it's also, is it not such a good thing, right? Now, you look at Greta van Fleet's website, and you read some of the reviews that are out there, and a lot of people are talking about how, when they post about their influences, Zepp isn't even mentioned. Now, that's probably a marketing ploy from their PR division, because they don't want the reference to Zeppelin to be there, because quite frankly, it is Zeppelin, right? So they're stating Robert Johnson, they're stating Buddy Guy, they're stating all these blues artists that they're influenced by, and it's oddly familiar because it sounds a lot like what Led Zeppelin's influences were when they first came out. So I guess the biggest problem we end up having with it is that on first listen and on a few listens, you're like hooked with that nostalgia. And like, first off, hands down, these guys are great musicians, right? These guys know what they're doing and they've got a good sound. What they haven't done is developed it for themselves. The originality is not there. So, to try to give these guys, one of my buddies, he said, I do not respect these musicians because they're out downright stealing from Zeppelin. And he's absolutely right. I mean, if you listen to the solos, if you listen to some of the riffs of the guitar player, he has stolen those licks, hands down, from many other, Led Zeppelin songs. Now, while the main primary riffs of the tunes are original, it's some of the additional things within the guitar playing that you'll go, man, that's straight out of Ramble On, or that's straight out of Misty Mountain Hop. There's little licks here and there, and they're pieced together. And if you really are truly a huge Zepp fan and you're a big Page fan, you're gonna like recognize those little licks immediately. Now, so to combat that with my buddy, I mean, I actually went to Page. Page has one of my favorite quotes of all time about music and music history. Zeppelin has notoriously been found to have, different lawsuits brought against them for copyright infringement and such. And Page's quote is this. He says, good artists borrow, good musicians borrow, great musicians steal. And they did. They know they did. They've admitted that they did, right? They took lyrics, they took, song structures, they took riffs. But at the end of the day, what they did is they made them their own, right? Led Zeppelin always made every single one of those stolen pieces their own. This is where I end up having a problem with Greta Van Fleet, because nothing that Greta Van Fleet does is specifically their own. It is Led Zeppelin, right? They took the Led Zeppelin formula, they took the Led Zeppelin sound, they took Led Zeppelin's influences and made it their own. So, at the end of the day, right now, for their first EP, Judgment is out. Greta Van Fleet, Thieves. But this is my challenge to them. If anyone from Greta Van Fleet's watching here, feel free, shout me out, send me an email, sean.chesney.music@gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts, and I'd love to talk to you, interview you guys, have you on the show, because at the end of the day, I'm a musician too, and I could be just as just as guilty of stealing different licks and songs and styles. You go with your gut, you go with what you love, you go with what you know, and if the music moves you, that's what you play, right? And I'm happy that you guys are doing it in such a great way, because it does. I mean, it sounds great. It really does, and you guys are good musicians. So don't think that I'm dissing you as musicians or anything like that. But you need to find your own sound. So this is my challenge. I want a new album from Greta Van Fleet, even a single that sounds like Greta Van Fleet. I don't want to hear Robert Plant again. I've seen Robert Plant. Robert Plant's still around. I'd love to see him again, and he still does what he does. I don't need to hear somebody sound exactly like Robert Plant. I need to hear somebody sound like themselves. So that's my challenge, Greta Van Fleet. Let me hear what Greta Van Fleet actually sounds like, not Greta Van Fleet playing Led Zeppelin. For another episode of Modern Mostly Biased Musicology, this is me. I'm out. We'll talk to you next time.